Hi everybody, it's Diane with Batik, and today we are going to talk about the Tamarack Jacket. This is the garment that I made over the last couple of days, and I absolutely love it. You can find pictures of me outside on a fall, very cold day here in North Dakota of me wearing this jacket, and I really love it a lot, and I think it is a special pattern. It's a fun pattern, and it's one that you're going to really enjoy. I am a turtleneck wearer. You can wear this with jersey knit tops, long sleeve. You could wear a button-down shirt, whatever is your style underneath this jacket, and you will love it for this fall and into winter and spring, and probably just not summer because there's wool inside there. But anyway, let's talk a little bit about this pattern. The Tamarack jacket pattern is by Grainline Studio. And this specific jacket, the pattern is ranging from a 0 in size with a bust of 32 to an 18 with a bust of 44. The size that you see here is a 12, and I have a bust of 38, 39, and so I ended up making a 12, just so you can get perspective on the size that I made here. Grainline Studios has been adding a second group of sizes to several of their patterns. I'm going to check and see, I didn't do that before doing this pattern review, whether or not there is another size range for the Tamarack jacket, but definitely look, and hopefully I can write something here as we publish this to make sure that you know one way or another. But it is a loose fitting style. It has a slightly dropped shoulder, and it's meant to have ease. I found that there was about 3 to 5 inches of ease in this jacket. I was a little concerned about making the exact size for me based off my bust and hip. I was going to grade it a little bit and decided not to because of the amount of ease. So when you make a sample, here's my sample, just know that it is supposed to fit loosely because it's also made from quilted fabric, and you don't want all that bulk just tightly around you. You may, I don't. So just to keep that in consideration when you are finding the size for you. This is designed for quilted fabric. And so the yardage on the back jacket has 2 different options. If you're going to quilt your own, it will take about 4 3/4 yards or 4 yards to 4 3/4 yards of fabric of 2 different fabrics, one for the outer and one for the inside or the lining, plus the pockets and the bias binding. It will take, I would say, about a twin size batting or equivalent to that in size. So if you have flannel at home or whatever you would like to fill inside your jacket, I used wool. I used a wool Tuscany. It's 100% wool is what I used. We'll talk about that in a minute. And you will need a little bit of interfacing as well. If you're purchasing pre-quilted fabric, you will need 2 yards. And I believe 2 yards at 45. Yes, and if it's pre-quilted at 54, it's slightly less, 1 2/3. I hadn't looked at that before because I'm working with our quilted fabric, which is 115 inches wide. So let's talk a little bit about what you need. Well, actually, I'm going to do the pattern pieces first, and then we'll get into what you need and what I used for my jacket. The pattern pieces themselves are very basic. We have the front with a welt pocket, and you will see that the sleeve is slightly longer simply because you want to have a little bit of room under your arm. The back is on the fold, and again, it has a slight, very slight curve to it. not very much at all. So if you would like more, change your style, add your grading, and adjust where you need to. The sleeve is, I would say, a little bit more open, simply because, and more at the top because it is a slightly dropped sleeve. It goes down to here. And the sleeve actually attaches to the front and the back. Very simply, you don't need gathering, you don't need any kind of stay stitching at all. Because you're working with quilted fabric, it simply inserts beautifully. We'll talk about that in a little bit as well. Then you have, I just used one pattern piece for this, but you have a top pocket that is shorter than the bottom pocket. And you need 2 of these for each pocket. And then you'll have your welt for the front on 2 pockets. This is what gets interfacing. And I used our Silk Envy, a very lightweight interfacing. You can use whatever you have if you want it a little stiffer to stand up, but I found this to be just about the perfect density for our batik cotton. I also did a couple of things with thread and notions, and I'll get to those in one moment, but I did start with our quilted fabric, and I pre-quilted our fabric using our long arm machine with a computerized edge-to-edge pantograph. And I have a Lenny from APQS, and I am actually very pleased because this was the very first time I created fabric on the Lenny that looked spectacular. So I really was a little cautious, but I told myself that if I'm going to make this jacket, which I've really wanted to make, and I've always wanted to make quilted fabric, and hopefully we can make that available to you shortly in any custom colorways that you would like with whatever filler you would like. We'll get to that in a minute, but I was really very pleased. So what I did for this jacket is I wanted to make sure I had enough fabric. So I cut and used 2 fabrics. The top fabric is they're both 115-inch wide batik cotton. The top fabric is Lady May in the color of Dusty Denim. It is, or Dusty Topaz, it is directional. So I had to be careful with that, which did require me to use a little bit more of the quilted fabric than I think I would have had to had it not been directional. The inside is Violetta Copen Blue. And again, this is 115-inch wide fabric. I also made the inside pocket out of that, the bias binding out of that fabric. And I should go back, the welt, I did make it out of the same fabric as the outer cotton. I didn't really trust my skills and kept it very neutral and very basic. If I would have been more daring, which I'm going to do next time, I will use the coordinating fabric in the welt because I really love how that looks. And I feel much more comfortable with my skills to do that. So it's an easy pocket to make, and you will love making it, to be honest. You'll love it. I used, I cut 48 inches off our bolts of both fabrics. I washed it at home, always wash fabric, because it makes the quilting so much easier. Getting rid of the excess dyes and wax really make it so much easier for your needle and your thread to really hold true to the fabric. It's just beautiful. And it gets rid of any stiffness and it brightens up the fabric. So please wash your fabric. I ironed up the fabric. I put it on the long arm machine, and I had Tuscany wool here in the office. And so I put that in between. And I was able to quilt from starting with about, after I washed the fabric, it shrunk 2 inches. And so I ended up with 45 by 115. I loaded that on, and I quilted a design that is a basic diamond design it's kind of like on point, this diamond design. I don't know if if you can see that, but I will show you that. I think you can see kind of the reflection of the design. It was very simple to do. And I ended up with between 36 inches and 40 inches of quilted fabric. And I love it. And this is, I have a lot left. So even though it says in the fabric requirements that you will use 45-inch wide 2 yards of quilted fabric, I believe that is the case because I used directional and I used slightly more of the 2 yards. I ended up using about 2.5 because every one of my pattern pieces had to face the same direction on the top. Okay. Besides the fabric, the other things to consider, when I quilted the fabric, I used So Fine from Superior Thread. I used a 50 weight. This is a 471 is the number. And I wanted it to match the outside fabric. I didn't really want to see a defined quilt stitch. Just, again, I'm so cautious. It's crazy. Then I used Madeira's polyester premium serger thread actually in the bobbin because I wanted this to match the coping on the underside of this jacket. And it was perfect. I used about 10 bobbins and I love it. I was a little worried about the top color being different than the bobbin color, but it got me to really focus on making sure my tension on my machine was correct. And I'll continue doing that. I love the look and I'm really not frightened of that at all. And I think it's wonderful. And if you're not doing that, you should definitely give it a try. Even if you quilt your fabric on your sewing machine, match your thread to the fabric that you have and never worry about it. A couple other things about the thread. That was the quilting machine. I took that same approach to my sewing machine. So whenever I was sewing a seam, I had the darker, this is chicory color from Madeira, in the bobbin, and I used the same thread, the 471 from Superior, in the needle, so that I was always coordinating throughout my jacket. And it turned out well. There are several places in this garment that I serged edges. I serged all of the seams, and we'll talk about that in a minute, and all the way around the pocket, just to finish everything off. I really wanted to seal up the quilted look and to make sure that the batting stayed inside when you wash your garment later. So I really focused on making sure that my thread matched, which means this. I used the 3 similar fabrics or similar threads, 471, in the 2 needles. I do everything with a 4-thread overlock when I seal my edges. So the 2 needles had the 471, which matches the top of the fabric. And then the upper looper also had this thread in it. And then my lower looper was the darker thread. And it really kind of kept it all together, and it doesn't make you have so many different cones of thread. So I really try to match my lower looper with the color of the fabric that is on the back, because we serge with our top fabric on the top. And that's something that I think you should do. I think it's a great concept, and I think it really makes the inside of your garment look really spectacular. So that's the only other thing that I did. When I laid out the pattern pieces on my quilted fabric, I could not use pins at all. I used our pattern weights, and whether or not you use pattern weights or not, it was just enough weight to keep the pattern piece sitting on top of the quilted fabric while I cut it out using a scissor. I did not use a rotary cutter. I used a scissor, and it was perfect. So whether or not if you don't have pattern weights, use a soup can, use something just with a little bit of weight to keep that pattern piece on your quilted fabric. And the binding itself, again, I mentioned that you need a fat quarter of fabric, and I use the coordinating fabric. I started with a fat quarter and I ended up with 5 yards plus because we cut 2-inch wide binding strips for this project. And that's all in the pattern. But I was able to use a lot of the binding, and I have just a little bit left, which is perfect. Then what else did I use? Okay, if you are going to make your own bias binding, use a binding maker, bias binding maker, because it'll make your life a lot easier. For this specific one, you would have needed a 1-inch binding bias, and then it would be perfect. I used a fabric pencil to make sure that I could trace the notches or the pattern marks, as well as the placement of the welt pocket. Now, make a sample. Definitely make a sample. And on this side of me is my sample. I found some blemished fabric that we had here in the store and used it to cut out this jacket. And I followed my pattern pieces that I had traced from the original pattern. And I found that at first I was concerned because I felt like it was big and just too big up here. But I remembered that this is not a tailored jacket. It is a loose fitting, low shoulder drop jacket. And it's going to be quilted fabric. And so take that into consideration. There is ease in this jacket. And so I felt like the fit from my lower bust down was good, and so I went with it. I also used this sample to make a welt pocket test for myself. I just wanted to make sure that the sizing of the opening, that the whole process worked well before I cut into the quilted fabric. I'm a little cautious, you'll find that out, but one thing about this jacket, and you know what I decided to do? I'm going to use this exact jacket to test out any other pockets, any other lapels, any other ways of adding things to a garment that are new to me. And I think it'll be kind of fun to see how this jacket converts into all the things that I'm going to teach myself how to do. But the welt pocket, and I'm going to hold this up. I used a contrasting fabric so that I could show you. The outside is just a simple placket or for the pocket opening. And then inside is your pocket, and right there. It is a very simple pocket to construct. But I want to talk about a couple things when it comes to this pocket. You have these pattern pieces. By the way, the first thing that you do when you construct the jacket is add the pocket. So we're going to start kind of going through the steps of this jacket and what I did to change the pattern instructions. But the pattern itself is written very well. The pocket itself is about 1 inch wider than the opening on each side of the welt pocket. The welt itself is intended to fit after it's sewn very snug. It's supposed to fit that cut opening perfectly. So if you haven't done and sewn up a welt pocket, follow the instructions, which are very well done, and make it on your sample garment first so that you know. I found the first time that I made this here that I had cut my opening in the front too far. So I reduced that to make sure that I could secure the edges of the welt placket right on the jacket as is described in the pattern. So just make sure that you don't cut that too far. You can always cut more, and make sure that it's right. But that's the only thing that I would just caution you on to make a sample. It's well worth it to take the time to make the sample on the pocket. The next step is actually make sure your binding is ready, because you start binding your pattern pieces very early on. So the first thing that is written in the pattern is to bind the back of your jacket. I'm going to stop you there though, for one reason. The edges of, and I'm going to hold this up as if it were the opening of your sleeve, okay? The edges of your quilted fabric are open. The threads are cut, and we want to secure that and seal that some way, shape, or form. What I decided to do was to serge the edges of every non-binding edge, okay? Because you don't need to serge anything that's going to have a binding on it. That would be a waste of time. But I'm going to take this off. Actually, I'll show you the pattern pieces. And I'll show you why I did what I did first. Like I said, the first step they want in the pattern is to add your bias binding to the back hem of your garment. You're working with just the back pattern piece at the time, but inside the jacket, and I'm going to show you this, you will end up with a join here. Mine's not perfect, but you'll end up with a join. And I normally would have serged in order to sew the sleeve all the way through to the hem of the jacket. I would have put this on my serger and like that serged the seam. I didn't want to exit my seam on top of the binding. I wanted the serging to be underneath the binding. So there's two ways to do this. You leave your binding edges untucked. So leave a little bit extra so that you could go back and hand bind on top of your serged seam. That is one way to do it. Or what I did this time, because I wanted this to be able to lay flat, you see how the seam opens? I serged ahead of time. Here's the front pattern piece. So I serged the arm and the side of the garment, my side seam, ahead of time. Basically just edge finishing with a serge. That's all I did. Then I also followed that same step for the back piece and the side of the back. And I serged the sides of my sleeves and the top of my sleeve. So all my serging is done at that point. Well, I serged my shoulders together without doing it ahead of time, but that was the only thing that I serged right on my serger was that, okay? I then used my sewing machine to do all of the remaining construction. So the edges are all finished ahead of time, no worries about anything. I can simply follow my 1/2 inch seam allowance and follow the instructions in the pattern to add the binding to the bottom, to sew the shoulder seam. I did that on the serger. So now I have my back and my front together. Then we need to add the binding to the front from this edge of the side seam all the way up the front, around the collar, and down the other side, and finishing at this side. Now remember, the side seam is not attached yet. We're not attached. It's just simply finishing it. So now my binding is finished, tucked, and the serging edges are inside that binding, and there are no extra threads at all. All of it is inside. The next step is to add your sleeve. Before I added my sleeve, here's a trick because I don't like sewing. I guess my other garment sleeve is in here, but I don't like sewing binding on my sewing machine in, I call it in the round, in this round little hole. because it gets to be so tedious. So what I did, and please look at the blog that we have on our website, and I'll show a couple of pictures here so that you can see the steps for what I did to add the binding to the sleeve. This is not in the pattern at all. They just simply write that once you have what the pattern wants you to do is stitch then from the edge of your sleeve down and finish your side seam. Then all you have to do is bind the edge of your sleeve hem. Well, I didn't do that. I added the binding while this was flat. So let's take our sleeve, okay? I added the binding here and I left it wide open. So the binding itself was only attached by the 1/2 inch seam allowance. So the rest of this is open. Then what I did is I sewed up the sleeve. I came back and I was able to simply, because of the fold lines on your bias binding, I simply folded it in and then one more time, and I hand stitched the binding here and did not put it on my sewing machine. And the seams, let me get this a little bit closer for you. The seams themselves are flat and the binding is finished very nicely. And so my edges inside my sleeve are all serged. Every piece is serged and finished. The pocket edge is serged and finished. And I think it will last a heck of a long time. So I really love how it turned out. And I liked the steps that I added to the garment construction. And what I did is I wrote them in the pattern. I like to do that is on the page where, this is a very detailed pattern, where the step is to add the binding, I made notes to say, serge your edges before adding the binding to make a nice finished look to the jacket inside. The other thing that I did, and I do this often, when you're working with 2 layers of quilted fabric and you're going around a curve on your sewing machine, I actually changed my foot, my presser foot, from a traditional presser foot to a zipper foot. I like to make that slim zipper be my press on my fabric while I can see the thread and I can see the needle. I know I'm at my 1/2 inch and I can work my fabric as I go around any curves. Like for example, the sleeve. I definitely used my zipper foot there because we're going around a curve. The zipper foot doesn't interfere with any of the bulk of the curve. It just stays right on that edge, still allowing me to have my 1/2 inch seam allowance. And I always make sure that the sleeve side is on my sewing machine table. That is down. I don't see the sleeve. So that is the one that I'm following, and I can move and navigate the jacket because it's a bigger piece on top of it. And it worked so smoothly. So if you haven't tried that, changing your presser foot out from your traditional presser foot to a zipper foot, when you have either bulk or you have a lot of curves, and it doesn't have to be quilted fabric. I've used the zipper foot before, even if I have 2 pieces of rayon that I'm putting my shoulder seam in, I'll put my zipper foot on. I can see it, and none of the presser foot that is on the left side, which is on my fabric side, interferes and moves the fabric at all. The zipper foot just stays away from it, and it makes it so much easier. So definitely try that little technique and let me know what you think about that. But I found that to be a very, very easy way to make this garment an easy garment to construct. The binding itself whoever wrote this, this pattern actually shows you how to turn your binding when you get to a corner. If you're not a quilter, quilters know this. They know how to add your binding, take and flip it, and then keep stitching down. So follow that technique. It's beautiful. If I would have had more time, I probably would have hand stitched the binding to the inside of the jacket. I didn't. And I'm also trying to be a better stitch in the ditcher. And also I did that here. So what I did is I folded it back. I folded the binding back all the way around. I think I can show you an image of that as well. I used 100 clips all the way around to do that. And I followed the stitch in the ditch with my thread that matches the top of the garment. The bobbin thread matched the inside, so you don't see the stitches along the edge of my bias binding. I did miss in a couple of spots, and I went back and I fixed it. You can also hand stitch it in any spot that you may have missed. So I'm just trying to get a little bit better on that. And I really like how this looked, and I think it will speed up the binding on my tablecloths and my table runners and my quilts a little bit. So for those that are utility in that way. Now, as I mentioned, there are two views to this jacket. The jacket finish can be a hook and eye, where your bias binding just meets, and it's a hidden hook and eye. I chose to put buttons in mine, and I really like the look of how it's finished because it adds a little bit of that turquoisey blue back to the front of the jacket. I didn't have snaps. It does recommend snaps, but I went with the buttons. So I used my buttonholer and I used my sewing machine, the foot that will attach with a zigzag your buttons. And I pulled the threads to the inside because it's a quilted jacket anyway. There's a lot of thread on the back. So I just decided a little buttonhole thread and a little button thread would not be a distraction. And so I tied my knot on the back and hid my threads underneath inside the quilted fabric. There's my jacket. So I hope these little tips and information about the Tamarack Jacket helped you in some way, shape, or form. And we have our little promo here. We have our fabrics for this jacket on our website. We have a fashion duo that includes the pattern, the interfacing, your selection of 2 fabrics, and we don't have the option yet for quilted fabric. I hope to have that on our website mid-November, and you'll be able to select the 2 fabrics that you would like. You'll be able to select the filler, so whether or not you would like wool batting, poly, cotton, whatever that happens to be within our selections that we'll have available at that time, and the threads and different ideas for the quilting design. Mine is quilted very densely to me, I think, for a quilted jacket. So I think the next one I'm going to make will be a little bit looser quilting and a little bit more flowy quilting. And I'm also going to turn this into a vest. So I have a lot of fun things that I want to do so stay tuned for those. But I think this style as a vest, I think I might have to adjust the sleeve a little bit, will be beautiful, but we can do the bias around the sleeve, and that will add another use for this pattern. The other thing is that quilted jackets are like all the rave this year, or last year, or whenever it was that it started, but you can't look at Pinterest or Instagram or any of the social media outlets and not see quilts that have been cut up and made into a jacket or a skirt or whatever is desired for a garment. And so hey, you may have a quilt at home, you may have backing at home, you may have batting at home, and decide to turn that into your quilted fabric for your jacket. It could be really fun. So that's an idea as well. And I'm going to look around and see if I have anything that I could do that with. It would be kind of fun to practice on the machine and come up with a quilting design for an actual quilt and cut it out. So that's another idea for you. But with my remaining fabric, I am going to make, here's a little intro. I'm going to make the Lullaby, oh, I hope you can see this, set. And I'm going to make the little quilted jacket and find a coordinate fabric in our jersey knit to make the pants. So we're going to make some of these for a little girl. And I know a lot of you ask every now and again, well, what jacket are you wearing or what garment are you wearing? I am wearing the jersey knit, and this is the Quick Sew 3693, and it's the hoodie over there. Again, a very simple project, and we have a fashion duo as well as the separate pattern and the fabric, again, jersey knit, on our website, and this took about 2.5 yards of fabric. No. It took 1.5 yards because our jersey knit is 72 inches wide. So you'll see that on our website. And we have underneath this beautiful little garment a coordinate, and she is from our batik rayon. This is the animal print in cream pearl. And we also have this available as the Lady May motif in cream pearl. So that could be an amazing outfit to wear with a matching coordinating button. This pattern is the Quick Sew 3161, and it's the long sleeve version. It's really very simple to make as well. And I believe we have a fashion duo on our website for this one as well. So that is all the information about all the things that you are seeing here. And ask any questions down below. You'll see all of our fashion duos and information below as well. And sign up for, if you're not subscribed to our YouTube channel, definitely do so. And we are starting to do giveaways for everybody that's made it this far in our videos. And so if you do make a comment below and subscribe, you will be eligible for a fun little gift from Sew Batik that will arrive once we communicate with you and get your address. And I think you will be very pleasantly pleased. So we're going to start doing that after every one of our videos. And I hope you enjoyed this, and give us some comments and have a wonderful weekend.